Hey guys, so this lecture is going to be over the nephron structure and function. So let's just dive into it. Your nephrons. So you might remember from the first video that the structure of the kidney has like three layers. We have the capsule, we have the cortex, and we have the medulla, just like the adrenal glands. So in this case, you can see the medulla being this darker color area and the cortex being this outer portion. This is super important with our nephron. So the nephron is the small functional unit within the kidney. Your kidney is chock full of millions of nephrons. So about 1 million nephrons per kidney. So you've got so many in order to go through and do this filtering. So it is found within the cortex and the medulla. Now the reason why this is so important is because of that concentration gradient. We're going to be talking a lot about diffusion and osmosis. So if you need a recap on that, I would pause this video and go back, find an Amoeba Sisters on osmosis and everything else, because that should help you guys get that foundational knowledge before we begin. So there's a lot going on here. We have, in the beginning, a lot of this blood, and this goes back to what we saw in the last lecture as well. We have the afferent arteriole, which is going to take blood into the glomerulus, which I know this is really hard to see, but this is the glomerulus right there. Afterwards, the blood is going to flow out of the efferent arteriole, and then it's going to make up this massive capillary bed that goes all over the nephron itself. So the nephron is a tube. When we're looking at this, we're going to be talking about things going into this tube and out of that tube. Anything that is left in the tube when we are finished is going to be urine. So let's dive in. The renal corpuscle / cortex. So this is that top layer. You can see it's a lighter pink. This is where we have the thing called the glomerulus. Blood is going to flow into this from the afferent with an A arteriole and is going to leave from the efferent or efferent with an E arteriole. It is surrounded by a ton of different capillaries and like this collection tube, I guess. So we have the glomerulus, which is all of like these tiny itty bitty capillaries with this Bowman's capsule, which is going to collect and surround it. It is connected to the capsule. The renal tubule is connected to the capsule. And so that's where this is all kind of coming together and forming one massive ball. Now, after we go from the renal tubule, it's going to go into the glomerulus, which is that like ball, then into this thing called the proximal convoluted tubule. So I'm talking about like blood is pushed into the glomerulus, it's squeezed out and collected into that Bowman's capsule, that like massive circular thing. Then everything that's in that circle is going to go into the proximal convoluted tubule. Now you guys remember, proximal means closer to, whereas distal is farther out. So proximal is closer to the glomerulus. Then it goes through this thing called the descending loop of Henle, which dives down into the renal medulla, then up the ascending limb of the loop. Then we're into the distal, as in farther away convoluted tubule, and eventually into the collecting duct, and then into the minor calyces, the major calyces, the renal pelvis, and then out the ureters and into the bladder. So, talking a little bit more about that glomerulus. We've looked, and I know this is kind of all over the place, but we're gonna eventually like pull all of this together. We've looked at hormones before. The juxtaglomerular apparatus is found within that first circle. So we have the afferent arteriole, we have the efferent arteriole. The glomerular apparatus is all of this blood stuff on the outside. And it is, before we even like make it into the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus itself. And this is where renin is secreted. Now, this is a hormone. This hormone is super important for your body fluid concentration. So whenever we're looking at urine collection, automatically assume that we are filtering blood. Blood has a ton of water in it. So if you have too much water or too little water, your body is going to release hormones in order to regulate those concentrations. So this apparatus has two types of cells. Once again, we are all outside of this like glomerulus and the renal corpuscle. So we've got the glomerulus is all of like the blood stuff, the capillaries on the inside. The Goemon's capsule is the covering, and the renal corpuscle is all that captures it on the outside. Ooh, that's a really nice picture of it. So the juxtaglomerular apparatus is all of this stuff on the outside. We have two types of cells. We have the densely packed cells called the macula densa. They're dense. And those are going to be near the distal convoluted tubule, which we're going to come back to later on. And then, most importantly, the juxtaglomerular cells in the afferent and efferent arterioles. So we have these cells that are right in this area, right there. Okay. Juxtaglomerular apparatus. This is that distal convoluted tubule because everything's kind of mashed all up in itself. And these are those juxtaglomerular cells. They secrete renin. Really important. We're going to be talking about that later. So now that we know, like this is where all of the urine formation is going to start. So we've got the nephron, which is like all the little squigglies with like the capillaries around it. And we also have like this renal corpuscle, which is going to be like the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule all connected. And then this is one of those tubes that's just going to happen to come back up. So we'll talk about renin later on. Let's talk now about how urine is formed. First, blood goes into the afferent arteriole and into the glomerulus. Okay, thank you. This is a Wikipedia picture. It works. So we go into the glomerular apparatus where those capillaries are found. Blood is going to leave there in the efferent arteriole, but only after some filtration has happened, which we're going to talk about in a second. Then after that, blood is going to flow through these peritubular capillaries, peri meaning around, tubular being tubes, and capillaries. So it's around the tube capillaries, where we're going to be reabsorbing things into the bloodstream and then secreting things back into the tubes. So this is where that urine is ultimately made. We're putting some things back into our blood that we need, and we're getting rid of some things that didn't exactly make it out over here. And then eventually this is going to go back into your blood system, and then this is where all the urine is. So first, we have glomerular filtration. Second, tubular reabsorption. We are reabsorbing things back into our bloodstream. Finally, tubular secretion. We are taking things from those peritubular capillaries and we are pushing them back into the nephron so that we can then urinate them out. This picture is fantastic. It takes that really messy picture we saw earlier and kind of cleans it up a little bit. So we have the afferent arteriole and we have the efferent arteriole. This is where filtration is going to happen. After filtration, we go into tubular reabsorption. We're putting things back into our bloodstream. We are taking things that are still in our bloodstream that shouldn't be in our bloodstream and dumping that back into the urine. And then all of the now clean blood, even though it is now deoxygenated, is then going to be pumped back through your circulatory system, whereas all of those wastes are going to stay inside of the nephron, eventually go into the collecting duct and be secreted. So, glomerular filtration. Remember, we have the afferent arterioles that are going to the glomerulus. We have all of those like little it looks like a network of capillaries inside, and then we have the efferent arterioles, which are going to leave it. So the glomerular filtration, even though you don't have 180 liters of blood in your body, you have roughly 5 liters of blood in your body, it's going to filter 180 every 24 hours. That is a ton. Remember, around 30% of your blood goes directly to your kidneys to filter it. Plasma is forced out of that glomerulus due to blood pressure. So once again, this is why we are connecting the circulatory system with your urinary system. That glomerulus, and I love this picture here too, We are showing the blood going into the afferent arteriole, and then it all just kind of like goes into this mess of capillaries. While it is in there, because of blood pressure, that squeezes the fluids or the plasma out of the capillaries and into Bowman's capsule. So now all of this fluid is just kind of like in the surrounding space. And then the remaining blood with very little plasma is going to go into the efferent arteriole. So all of that plasma is squeezed out of the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule. And once again, this whole thing is called the renal corpuscle. So we got three names. We have the glomerulus, which is the capillaries, Bowman's capsule, which is like the epithelial tissue covering it, and then the renal corpuscle is the whole kit and caboodle. So the glomerular capillary is more permeable than other capillaries because it has these tiny openings called fenestra, which I talked about this before. In French, that means window. So we have these little tiny windows which allow for all of that plasma to be squeezed out of the glomerulus and then into that surrounding space. The little guys called podocytes, these are cells that look like feet. I don't know. But they cover the capillaries so that the plasma proteins can't leave. We don't want our albumin, our globulins, or our fibrinogen to leave and be filtered out because our body makes a lot of that and works hard to keep it there. So the podocytes make sure that the only thing that is small enough to get through is the plasma itself. So, I want to say this. The glomerular capsule receives glomerular filtrate. That's all the plasma that gets squeezed out. So we talked about with the lymphatic system how we have plasma, and then because of your heart, it pushes fluids out in between your capillaries, and it sits in between the cells, and now that is called extracellular fluid. And then when the lymphatic system, it soaks it up, that's now called lymph. All of the fluid that got pushed out of the glomerule itself is called glomerular filtrate. So same exact stuff, just a different name based off of its location. So this is where we're at. We have the renal artery that's going into the kidney, and it splits up and eventually becomes the afferent arterioles. The afferent arteriole takes whole blood, and that goes into the glomerulus, where that pressure from the blood forces the fluids out, and that's what collects here and becomes the glomerular filtrate. The blood with less plasma is then going to leave in the efferent arteriole and eventually is going to make its way around all over the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, and the distal convoluted tubule. So you can see how these peritubular capillaries are wrapped tightly around everything, and this is where the second and third step are going to happen. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video. So far what we've covered is the basic structure of the nephron. I've mentioned renin, which we're going to come back to later on, and we've talked about glomerular filtration. So the next video is going to be over tubular reabsorption and tubular secretion. Good luck. Let me know if you have any questions.